Omega is one of the biggest watch brands in the world, selling about $3 billion worth of watches each year. It's the third largest watch company, right after Rolex and Cartier. Today, the Omega symbol is an unmistakable icon seen around the world, with tens of millions of watches sold throughout its history. Omega's story is sometimes about overcoming huge challenges and building a powerful brand, but other times, it's a tale of crisis, near collapse, and even death. And although it might seem like just a watch company, Omega secretly plays a big role in other industries not related to watches at all. Honestly, this is a crazy story, so sit back and relax as we journey through the insane history of Omega. The year was 1848, and back then, watches were more than just tools. They were treasures. Each pocket watch was a handcrafted masterpiece, and Swiss watches, known for their superior quality, were just beginning to make a name for themselves on the global stage. But change was in the air. Across the Atlantic, the United States was exploring new methods of production. This was the dawn of mass production in the watch industry, a stark contrast to the artisanal techniques that had been the norm in Europe. At the same time, the rapid expansion of railroads was creating an unprecedented demand for precise timekeeping. Suddenly, accuracy wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. Right at the center of this watchmaking revolution was La Chaux-de-Fonds, a small Swiss town nestled in the mountains. Known for its clockmaking traditions, the town was buzzing with activity, and it was here that a young entrepreneur named Louis Brandt decided to start La Générale Watch Co., what would become famously known as Omega later on. Louis was just 23 years old when he opened his modest workshop. It was a small operation, but it was driven by big ambitions. Louis began by assembling precision pocket watches using parts supplied by local craftsmen. As the years went by, Louis's business steadily grew. What started in a small workshop began reaching customers far beyond Switzerland's borders. His timepieces began attracting a loyal following, but then tragedy struck. Louis died, and the bustling workshop fell silent. The thriving business he had built no longer had its founder to propel it forward. Yet in the shadow of this loss, a new chapter was waiting to be written, one that would catapult the company to heights even Louis could never have imagined. His two sons, Louis-Paul and César, inherited their father's company. By the time their father passed, the watchmaking industry was facing new challenges. The traditional methods their father used were becoming unreliable. Determined to uphold his legacy, the brothers made a bold decision: relocate the business to Biel, a town with better access to manpower, energy, and transportation. They expanded their operations, moving into a small factory. But as their ambitions grew, so did their needs, and they soon upgraded to a larger facility, one that would become the heart of their enterprise and where Omega's headquarters still stands today. It was here that the brothers began laying the foundation for the company's future success, including one of their greatest achievements, the 19 lean caliber. This movement revolutionized watchmaking. It was the first to allow winding and setting of the watch via the crown, something the industry had never seen before. Realizing the significance of this innovation, the brothers named the movement Omega, symbolizing the ultimate achievement, as Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. The public loved it. So much so that in 1903, the entire company was rebranded as Omega. By this time, Omega had become a world leader in watchmaking, employing over 800 workers and producing more than 200,000 watches annually. But just as the company was reaching its peak, tragedy struck. Both Brandt brothers died unexpectedly within months of each other, a mysterious turn of events that remains puzzling to this day. Suddenly, Omega, one of the largest watch companies in Switzerland, was left with no leadership. The only natural heirs were 4 young men. The eldest of the 4 was only 23 years old. His name was Paul Emil Brandt. Immediately, he was thrust into a leadership role with immense responsibility. But little did Paul Emil know that he would have to navigate the company through some of the most challenging times in history over the next few years. World War I broke out and brought with it unprecedented hardships. Omega, like many companies, found itself deeply involved in the war effort. The demand for reliable military timepieces skyrocketed, and Omega played a crucial role in supplying watches. But the war also strained resources, and the economic instability that followed made survival difficult for many watchmakers. In the aftermath of the war, the world plunged into further chaos with the Spanish flu pandemic. This deadly virus swept across the globe, claiming more lives than the war itself and leaving no corner of the world untouched. Barely hanging on through the years of war and disease, Omega now faced a new wave of social and economic unrest. Switzerland was in the midst of one of the most significant domestic crises in its history, the General Strike of 1918. At the Omega factory in Biel, the tension was thick. Workers, inspired by the national strike, occupied the factory, bringing production to a standstill. Paul Emile found himself at the helm of a company fighting for survival year after year, and the challenges didn't stop there. The next few years would push Omega to the very brink of collapse. The year was 1925, and Europe was still reeling from the devastation of the First World War. Omega and Tissot, two titans of Swiss watchmaking, had managed to weather the storm so far. In this unforgiving environment, Paul Emile began to consider a bold move: a merger with Tissot. It was a risky proposition, but Paul Emile believed it was essential to avoid total collapse. Just as Paul Emile and his counterparts at Tissot were contemplating this merger, the world was about to be rocked by yet another catastrophe. The Wall Street crash of 1929 sent shockwaves through the global economy, plunging nations into the Great Depression. For Omega and Tissot, the merger was no longer just a strategic move, it was a matter of survival. In 1930, the deal went through and the two companies came together, forming SSIH. This new entity would own and operate both brands, allowing them to combine their strengths while maintaining their distinct identities as Omega and Tissot. It was a marriage of necessity, forged in the harsh realities of the time. Omega concentrated on the luxury segment, continuing to craft high-end timepieces. Meanwhile, Tissot catered to the mid-range market, offering quality watches at a more accessible price point. As the financial storm decimated many of their competitors, Omega managed to weather the harsh era. At a time when the world was searching for symbols of hope and excellence, Omega seized the opportunity. The International Olympic Committee had long struggled with the accuracy of timekeeping at the Games, relying on multiple manufacturers whose watches were only accurate to within 1/5 of a second. Omega's solution was groundbreaking. They sent a single watchmaker with 30 stopwatches to the 1932 Summer Olympics. These stopwatches were amazing. They could measure time to within 1/10 of a second and could record split-second times. This was a huge step forward in timing technology that would change the Olympics forever. This partnership would continue to grow over the decades, with Omega becoming the official timekeeper of the Olympics, a role it proudly holds to this day. Years later, as the world plunged into the chaos of World War II, Omega once again found itself at the forefront of a global crisis. The company delivered over 100,000 watches to the British Ministry of Defence during World War II, including models specifically designed for pilots, navigators, and soldiers. In the years following the war, Omega introduced a trio of watches that would go on to achieve legendary status: the Speedmaster, the Seamaster 300, and the Railmaster. The Speedmaster was destined for greatness from its inception. Originally designed as a racing chronograph, it caught NASA's eye for space exploration missions. The Seamaster 300 was another groundbreaking timepiece. Created for underwater exploration, it quickly became the go-to watch for divers and adventurers, cementing Omega's reputation for excellence in extreme conditions. The Railmaster, meanwhile, showcased Omega's cutting-edge anti-magnetic technology. It was designed for scientists and engineers who worked in environments with strong magnetic fields. As the space race intensified in the 1960s, Omega's watches played a pivotal role. The Speedmaster, already a beloved timepiece on Earth, was selected by NASA for its space missions due to its unmatched precision and durability. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the moon, the Speedmaster was there, earning its place in history as the first watch worn on the moon. It earned Omega the prestigious Snoopy Award from NASA, an honor reserved for those who make significant contributions to the success of human spaceflight. The Speedmaster's role in the Apollo missions further solidified Omega's reputation as a brand that could be trusted in the most extreme conditions, from the depths of the ocean to the far reaches of space. As the decade progressed, Omega continued to innovate and expand its influence, but the challenges that lay ahead would threaten to unravel everything they had painstakingly built, bringing Omega to the brink of collapse once again. For nearly a century, Swiss watchmakers like Omega had enjoyed an unrivaled reputation, known for craftsmanship and luxury. Yet, a storm was brewing, one that would soon bring the Swiss watch industry to its knees. The Japanese watchmaker, Seiko, unleashed a revolution with the launch of the Astron, the world's first commercially marketed quartz wristwatch. This unassuming timepiece would change the entire watch industry, triggering a crisis later known as the Quartz Crisis. Traditional mechanical watches are powered by a spring mechanism, but the Astron used a battery-powered quartz movement. Compared to mechanical watches, it was astonishingly accurate, affordable, and easy to mass produce. Seiko's innovation wasn't just technological, it was strategic. The company adopted a new marketing approach, focusing on the quartz watch's precision rather than the craftsmanship that had long been the hallmark of traditional watchmaking. These watches were not only more accurate than their mechanical counterparts, but also significantly less expensive. As Seiko's quartz watches flooded the market, the Swiss watch industry found itself cornered. The collapse of the Swiss watch industry was nothing short of dramatic. Sales volumes plummeted from 12.4 million to a mere 1.9 million watches. Gross sales tanked and the workforce was decimated, with tens of thousands of jobs lost. Despite their best efforts, Swiss watchmakers couldn't compete with the flood of inexpensive quartz watches from Japan. Even a $150 million bailout from the Swiss banking industry couldn't ease the suffering. Enter Nicholas Hayek, a self-made millionaire businessman. A banker friend approached Hayek with a proposition: develop a plan to sell Omega Tissot and the other watchmakers under the SSIH group to the Japanese. The proposal infuriated Hayek. The idea that Switzerland would surrender its 200-year-old tradition of watchmaking excellence to be sold off was unthinkable. Instead of giving up, Hayek had one last plan to save Omega and the entire Swiss watch industry. He developed what would come to be known as the Hayek Study. At the heart of this plan was a bold recommendation: merge Omega and the rest of SSIH with ASU AG, who was the world's largest producer of watch movements and components. This merger would combine their strengths and resources, creating a more resilient entity, capable of weathering the storm. Desperate to salvage what they could, the banks agreed to Hayek's proposal and the deal went through. But Hayek's vision didn't stop there. For the Swiss watch industry to survive, it needed to evolve. Hayek proposed the development of an inexpensive, Swiss-built quartz watch that would be accessible to the masses. This second watch, as he called it, would be affordable, fashionable, and most importantly, it would embody Swiss quality in a new modern form. Thus, Swatch was born, the name a contraction of second watch. The Swatch was an instant success, injecting new life into the Swiss watch industry. It provided the financial breathing room needed for the newly merged SSIH and ASU AG holding company to stabilize. This holding company would later change its name to Swatch Group, in homage to the watch that had saved it from the brink of disaster. Omega had made significant strides in reclaiming its former glory, but the brand was still far from fully revived. Recognizing the need for fresh direction, Hayek knew it was time to bring in a visionary leader who could steer Omega toward its full potential. That's when Hayek made a strategic move. He purchased another watch company for around $43 million from a young and ambitious entrepreneur named Jean-Claude Beaver. The day after selling to Hayek, Beaver gathered his entire staff and announced the news, but almost immediately, Beaver began to regret his decision. The company he had sold, Blancpain, was more than just a brand to Beaver, it was his passion. He found himself in a deep depression, feeling as though he had lost not just a company, but a part of himself. In a moment of desperation, Beaver reached out to Hayek, asking to be brought back into the fold. Hayek, ever the visionary, saw an opportunity in Beaver's request. "You're going to be frustrated," Hayek warned. "I'm giving you a challenge. Get Omega back on its feet again." Beaver accepted. His first major move was to rethink Omega's marketing strategy. For years, Omega had leaned heavily on its connection to NASA and the Apollo missions, but decades had passed since astronauts wore Omegas on the moon. The brand needed a new message, something that resonated with a modern audience. Beaver came up with the idea of having famous people, called brand ambassadors, help promote the brand. He started by getting supermodel Cindy Crawford to help with a big project, relaunching the Omega Constellation watch for women. Cindy didn't just appear in ads, she also visited Omega's factories, helped design new watches, and became an important part of the brand's image. By teaming up with Cindy Crawford, Beaver made Omega even more well-known and liked. But Beaver's most audacious move was yet to come with the introduction of James Bond. The idea came from a young student who approached Beaver with a proposition. The Bond franchise was ready to switch watch brands, and it wouldn't require a huge investment to make Omega the new choice. Beaver was skeptical at first. The student argued that Bond had immense appeal among young people, and that this partnership could be a game changer for Omega. In the past, James Bond wore a Rolex Submariner, as written in the original James Bond books. However, the filmmakers had switched watch brands over the years, eventually settling on Seiko during the peak of the Quartz movement, viewing it as the future of watchmaking. Finally convinced by the young student's idea, Beaver went to Hollywood to negotiate with the Bond producers on behalf of Omega. The producers initially asked for only $50,000 for James Bond to wear an Omega. Beaver, thinking bigger, offered them $2 million. This unconventional move wasn't just about product placement. He wanted people to think of Omega whenever they thought of Bond.
Rolex.
Omega.
Beautiful.
To do this, he made sure that Pierce Brosnan, the actor who played Bond, wore the Omega Seamaster watch in the 1995 movie GoldenEye. The gamble paid off spectacularly. Before the Bond deal, Omega was selling around 10,000 to 15,000 Seamaster watches annually. After the campaign, that number skyrocketed to 50,000 pieces. By the late 1990s, Beaver's efforts had transformed Omega. Under his leadership, the brand saw a near threefold increase in revenue from $350 million to over $900 million. But the brand's story of success didn't end there. Omega's transformation took a significant leap forward with the introduction of the coaxial escapement in 1999. This groundbreaking technology reduced friction within the watch mechanism, leading to improved precision and durability. The coaxial escapement was a small revolution in watchmaking, positioning Omega's movements among the most reliable in the industry. Building on this success, Omega introduced the caliber 8500 in 2007, a movement designed entirely from scratch to fully leverage the new technology. This movement not only enhanced efficiency and reliability, but also offered a longer power reserve and greater resistance to magnetic fields. These technological achievements paved the way for Omega's introduction of the Master Chronometer certification in 2015. Watches earning this certification have to pass rigorous tests, further reinforcing Omega's reputation for quality. The story of Omega is one of resilience, innovation, and transformation, from its humble beginnings in a small Swiss town to becoming one of the most recognized and respected watch brands globally. Throughout its history, Omega has had to fight to survive. From untimely deaths and the economic devastations of world wars to the existential threat posed by the Quartz Crisis. Yet time and again, Omega has not only survived, but thrived, reinventing itself to meet the demands of each new era. The brand's ability to innovate, whether through the creation of advanced mechanical movements, pioneering timekeeping at the Olympics, or developing novel marketing strategies, has consistently set it apart from its competitors. Omega's watches have not only kept time, but have also marked some of history's most significant moments, from the trenches of World War II to the surface of the moon.